As the weeks went by, Anointed's suspicions grew stronger. She noticed little things about Solomon that hadn't caught her attention before: how he avoided eye contact when she brought up their marriage, the way he always seemed distant even at home. It was as if he was there in body but somewhere else in spirit. One evening, as Anointed prepared dinner, Solomon sat silently, lost in thought. She set the table, hoping the warm meal would encourage him to open up, but he barely touched his food, just poking at it with his fork. "Solomon," she began gently, "is something troubling you? I feel like you're drifting away. We're married now, but I feel more alone than ever." Solomon looked up, forcing a small smile. "I'm just focused on my duties as a pastor. The church is growing, and there are so many people who need guidance. It's a lot of responsibility." Anointed nodded, trying to be understanding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. That night, while Solomon was away at a church meeting, she decided to pray. She knelt by her bedside, pouring her heart out, asking for strength, wisdom, and understanding. The next Sunday, Anointed sat in the front row as Solomon preached. The church was fuller than ever, with people standing outside just to hear his words. Solomon's sermons had become even more powerful, and he was now known as a prophet. People traveled from far and wide, hoping for his prayers and blessings. But something still didn't feel right to Anointed. While others saw Solomon as a man of God, she could sense the heavy weight he was carrying in silence. After the service, Solomon went to his office, and Anointed decided to confront him once more. She knocked on the door and entered, finding him sitting there, deep in thought. "Solomon," she said firmly, "I know you're hiding something from me. I'm your wife, please let me help you." Solomon looked up, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite understand. Just then, there was a knock on the door. A church elder entered, announcing that a large crowd had gathered outside, hoping for Solomon's prayers. Relieved for the interruption, Solomon stood up, saying, "I have to go. We'll talk about this later." As he walked out, Anointed was left alone in the office, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. That evening, when they returned home from church, Anointed decided to try once more to connect with her husband. She approached Solomon, gently reaching out to touch his shoulder, but Solomon quickly pulled away, saying, "I'm tired, Anointed. It's been a long day." Anointed felt a pang of sadness. "Solomon, we're husband and wife, don't you think we should be closer? It's not just about being tired, you keep pushing me away." Solomon's face tightened with frustration. "Anointed, do you call yourself a child of God, and yet you're always talking about love and intimacy? Why can't you focus on the church, on our mission to make it even bigger?" Anointed felt her heart sink. "So, you married me to be like a piece of furniture, someone to just fill a space in your life? Solomon, I'm not asking for anything strange, I'm your wife. I have the right to want love and connection." Solomon's voice grew cold. "Isn't it enough that I care for you, that I provide for you? You have everything: a house, money, expensive clothes, jewelry, even a car. What more do you want?" Tears filled Anointed's eyes as she looked at him. "Solomon, I didn't marry you for those things. I married you because I believed you loved me, and I wanted a real partner, not just a provider. Do you even see me as your wife, or just someone you can say is by your side?" "You worry too much, Anointed," Solomon said, his tone almost dismissive. "Do you even know who you're married to? Back in the day, I was the one everyone wanted. Women used to chase after me. You should be grateful you have me." Anointed felt his words cut deep, her heart sinking. "Solomon, that's not why I married you. I thought we'd share everything, that you'd let me in. I want to know who you really are." For a moment, Solomon's face softened, but then his eyes grew cold again. "Anointed, there are things you wouldn't understand. Some things can't be spoken of. Just let it go." Feeling defeated, Anointed sank into her chair, feeling a wall between them that seemed impossible to break. Solomon turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her dreams of a loving marriage slowly slipping away. The next day, feeling lost and worried, Anointed decided to call Solomon's father. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Papa, since Solomon and I got married, he hasn't been close to me. I don't know what's wrong." Solomon's father was silent for a moment, surprised by her words. He had expected her to share happy news, maybe even that she was expecting a baby. Clearing his throat, he said, "I thought you were calling with good news, my daughter. I thought you might tell me I'll soon be a grandfather." Anointed sighed, trying to hold back tears. "I thought so too, Papa, but Solomon keeps saying he needs to wait on the Lord." Solomon's father was troubled. He had always wanted grandchildren, and he was beginning to worry about his son's strange behavior. That evening, he called Solomon to visit him. When Solomon arrived, his father sat him down with a serious look. "Son, what's going on with you? Your wife tells me you haven't been close to her since you got married. Are you all right?" Solomon laughed it off, shaking his head. "Papa, you worry too much. I'm focused on doing the work of the Lord." But his father wasn't satisfied. "Solomon, I understand that you want to serve, but family is important too. Your wife deserves love and respect, and I want to see grandchildren one day. This isn't just about you." Solomon frowned, looking away. "Papa, please understand, I have a calling. I'm doing what I believe is right." Solomon's father sighed, feeling a heaviness in his heart. He looked his son in the eyes and said, "Son, faith is important, but so is family. You have a duty to both. Don't push those you love away." Solomon stayed silent, unable to respond. Anointed's words and his father's advice echoed in his mind as he left, his thoughts swirling. What was he truly afraid of, and how long could he keep these walls up around his heart? As months went by, some of Prophet Solomon's church members began whispering among themselves. They had noticed that Anointed wasn't pregnant, and their curiosity quickly turned into gossip. One day, after a Sunday service, a small group gathered in a corner of the churchyard. One woman with a sly smile leaned in close and whispered, "Have you noticed Prophet Solomon and his wife have been married for months, and still no child?" Another woman raised her eyebrows, giving a knowing look. "Who knows, maybe he used her womb for his powers. All these miracles he performs, where do you think they come from?" A third woman shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. "You should mind your own business, maybe God has a different plan for them. Besides, Anointed is a kind soul, why spread rumors?" The group continued, unaware that Anointed had overheard bits of their conversation as she walked past. Her heart sank, as she quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't heard. She felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of shame and hurt. When Anointed got home that evening, she couldn't hold in her frustration any longer. She told Solomon everything she had heard, the whispers, the hurtful accusations, and the nasty gossip. She could barely finish her words before tears welled up in her eyes. Solomon's face grew dark with anger. "They think they can come to my church, receive blessings, and still speak against us," he muttered, clenching his fists. "I'll show them who they're dealing with." That Sunday, Prophet Solomon stood before his congregation, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the two women who had spread the rumors. He addressed the congregation with a voice that echoed through the building, stern and commanding. "There are some among us who think it's right to spread lies," he announced. "Some who think they can tarnish the names of God's chosen servants. You know who you are, and I won't allow such wickedness in this holy place." The two women looked down, clearly uncomfortable, their faces turning pale as the crowd murmured around them. Solomon didn't stop there. "If you think you can judge God's work without consequences, you are wrong. This is my final warning to those who gossip and lie in God's house." He pointed at the two women. "I don't want to see either of you here again." Gasps filled the church, and the two women quickly rose from their seats, hurrying out of the church in shame. Solomon continued his sermon as if nothing had happened, but a wave of tension had fallen over the room. After the service, Solomon called Michael, one of his loyal ushers, into his office. Michael was a humble young man who had always been devoted to the church, but he was struggling financially and often shared his troubles with Solomon. Solomon looked him over, giving a small, calculating smile. Solomon paused, then said carefully, "I want you to help me fulfill my duty as a husband. You know I am busy with God's work, and I can't be distracted, but it is time my wife, Anointed, has a child." He fixed his gaze on Michael. "If you do this, I'll make sure you're rewarded greatly." After Solomon made his offer, Michael's eyes went wide with shock. He shook his head quickly, taking a step back. "No, Prophet Solomon, I can't do that. Michael stammered. I respect you and your wife, but this isn't right. Solomon leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Michael, think carefully. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to lift yourself and your family out of hardship. Do you think the Lord would abandon his faithful servant when there's a way to ease his suffering? Michael shook his head again, but then thoughts of his mother filled his mind. She had been in the hospital for weeks with bills piling up that he couldn't pay. He thought of her lying there, waiting for help that never seemed to come. His heart grew heavy with guilt and worry. Finally, he looked up at Solomon, his voice trembling. My mother, she's in the hospital. The bills are so high, and I can't pay them. He paused, struggling with his words. If I do this, will you help me cover her hospital expenses? Solomon smiled and placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. Of course, Michael, consider it done. You help me, and I'll make sure your mother gets the care she needs. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision. Okay, I'll do it, he said quietly. But listen, Solomon added, his tone serious. You must not tell anyone about this. It has to stay between us. If anyone finds out, it could ruin everything. Do you understand? Michael nodded, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. I understand, I won't tell anyone. With that, the two shook hands, sealing their secret pact. Michael felt a heavy burden settle on his heart, knowing he was crossing a line he never thought he would, but for the sake of his mother, he was willing to do what it took. When Solomon got home, he found Anointed sitting in their living room, her expression a mix of concern and love. He walked up to her, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry for how I've been, I've changed, he said earnestly. Tonight, we're going to have a wonderful time together as husband and wife, but first, we need to drink a little. Anointed's eyes widened in surprise. Drink? But you know alcohol is against our faith. I don't drink, and I won't start now. Solomon stepped closer, his voice softening. I love you so much, my wife. This is important to me. Alcohol will help me with some things. If you really love me, you will support me. People are talking behind our backs about not having children. Let's put an end to their gossip. Anointed hesitated, her heart torn. She wanted to support her husband, but she also knew this went against everything she believed in. Finally, feeling the pressure of his words and the weight of their situation, she reluctantly agreed. Fine, but just a little. They went to the kitchen, and Solomon poured 2 glasses. Unbeknownst to Anointed, he had filled her glass with alcohol but had secretly been drinking water himself. Cheers, he said, raising his glass with a smile. Anointed raised her glass, and they both took a sip. At first, she felt uneasy, but Solomon kept encouraging her. Just relax, my love, this will help us. As the night went on, they drank more, and Anointed began to feel lightheaded. The alcohol made her sleepy, and soon she was struggling to keep her eyes open. Solomon, I'm feeling so tired, she mumbled before she finally fell asleep on the couch. Solomon walked over to the door and opened it, allowing Michael to step inside. Michael wasted no time and immediately took control of the situation with Anointed. Meanwhile, Solomon was in the next room, tears streaming down his face as he cried bitterly. The sounds of what was happening were almost too much for him to bear. When Michael finally finished and left, Solomon felt utterly devastated. He slumped to the floor, questioning his life choices. What kind of life is this? What have I gotten myself into? He thought, feeling a deep sense of regret and sorrow. As dawn broke, Anointed woke up, her head pounding from the excessive alcohol. She was furious. Why did you give me so much to drink? She demanded, her voice filled with anger. Don't ever do that again. Solomon, filled with guilt and remorse, quickly apologized. I'm so sorry, Anointed. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. It won't happen again, I promise. At church the next day, Michael walked up to Solomon after the service, looking upset. Prophet Solomon, he said quietly, I need to talk to you about the money we talked about. Solomon turned to him and acted innocent. What about it? Michael crossed his arms. You promised me some money for helping you. I thought you would pay me now since I've done my part. Solomon shook his head. No, not yet. My wife has to be pregnant first before I give you anything. Michael's eyes got wide. What do you mean? That's not what we agreed on. I helped you with this plan. I should get paid now. Solomon's face grew serious. Listen. Michael, I don't have time for this. You knew the deal. Anointed has to be pregnant, or I can't pay you. It's that simple. But I took a risk for this, Michael said, getting frustrated. What if someone finds out? What if this goes wrong? You're putting me in a bad spot. Solomon stepped closer and spoke quietly. You agreed to help me. You need this money for your mom's hospital bills. Don't act like you didn't want to do it. Michael hesitated, looking confused. He really needed the money, but he was worried about getting caught. I thought I would get something for my trouble, he said quietly. Solomon sighed and ran his hand through his hair. I'll make it worth it, I promise. Just focus on getting her pregnant first. Once she's expecting, I'll give you your share. You'll see. With that, Solomon turned away, leaving Michael feeling frustrated and cheated. He felt trapped in a plan that was becoming more complicated every day. For the next few nights, Solomon continued his plan with Anointed. He would persuade her to drink with him, telling her it was the only way he could be a good husband. Reluctantly, Anointed would agree, though she still felt uneasy about it. She loved Solomon and wanted to make their marriage work, so she went along with his wishes. Once she was asleep from the effects of the alcohol, Michael would come in, as secretly arranged by Solomon. Under the cover of night, he would have his way with her, taking advantage of the situation without her knowing. Each night, Solomon would play along with the charade, keeping up the appearance of a loving husband who was just trying to make things right. After a few weeks of this, Anointed began to feel strange. She felt tired all the time, and soon she started feeling sick in the mornings. Worried, she went to the doctor, who confirmed that she was pregnant. Excited, Anointed rushed home to tell Solomon the news. I'm pregnant, she announced with joy, feeling her heart swell with happiness at the thought of starting a family. Solomon put on a big smile and hugged her, acting overjoyed. Finally, he said as he embraced her. He then called his father and proudly shared the news, saying, You're going to be a grandfather soon. Solomon's father was overjoyed, thrilled that their family would soon be growing. On Sunday, Solomon stood before his congregation, filled with pride, ignoring Anointed's quiet request to keep the pregnancy private. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd and announced, I have wonderful news to share with you all. My dear wife, Anointed, is expecting a child. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. People were overjoyed, clapping and calling out blessings for the soon-to-be parents. Some came forward after the service, congratulating them and showering them with well wishes. It was as if Solomon's announcement had lifted a weight from the church. All the gossip and whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by excitement for the prophet's growing family. After the service, Michael quietly slipped into Solomon's office, keeping his voice low as he offered his congratulations. Congratulations, prophet, he said, forcing a smile as he held his hands together nervously. I'm really happy for you and Anointed. Solomon nodded, barely looking up as he gathered his things. Michael took a deep breath and continued, About the money you promised to pay me once the news was confirmed, my mother's surgery is scheduled soon, and I need the money urgently. Solomon turned and waved him off, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry, Michael, I'll make sure you're taken care of, he said dismissively. Come back next week, and we'll talk. Michael's face fell, a mix of worry and frustration flashing across his features. But prophet, the hospital says my mother can't wait another week. Please, you promised. Solomon's smile faded, replaced by a stern look. I said next week. Be patient, Michael. Don't you trust me? He replied, his tone icy. Michael swallowed hard, feeling defeated. He knew it would be pointless to argue further, so he left the office quietly, though his heart felt heavy with worry and frustration. As he walked out of the church, he wondered how much longer he could keep waiting while his mother needed him the most. 2 days later, Michael's world came crashing down. His mother, who had been holding on in the hospital, passed away. The news shattered him. She was gone, all because he couldn't get the money he had desperately needed for her surgery. Grief and anger filled his heart as he sat in his small room, clutching a photo of her. Tears streamed down his face, and his mind raced with painful memories and regrets. In a fit of rage and sorrow, he grabbed his phone and dialed Prophet Solomon's number. The moment Solomon answered. Michael's voice erupted with fury. Are you happy now, prophet? My mother is dead. She's gone because you broke your promise. All this pain, all this shame, it's all because of you. There was silence on the other end before Solomon finally replied, sounding calm and cold. Michael, mind your words. Remember who you're speaking to.